impulse to build, my personal impulses and impulses that I see in the community. Now, when we first begin to think about building, many of our responses are autobiographical. This is a small city, but really it is a book cover. Inside of this book go my personal journals that deal with identity and location. I was raised in rural Wisconsin, and I built all kinds of little cities and forts out in the forest, and I watched my wild meadow transform into a modular subdivision. It became really apparent to me that systems of nature and systems of building were highly integrated. I carved wooden cities out of stumps that I hauled out of the woods. And this image was based on a visit to a outdoor weaver's village in Mexico. And we were outside sitting and weaving and enjoying ourselves, and all of a sudden I sensed something over the top of my head, and I looked up, and the entire expanse of the studio was covered in a giant web. And there were hundreds and hundreds of little spiders crawling all over the place. And I looked at the weavers, and they weren't concerned, and they said, well, they're migrating. They do this every year. And that was when the story and the creation stories of the Spider Woman became really influential to me, as she plants and harvests and spins and weaves the world. Unfortunately, destruction stories were also equally important. My small city was completely flattened by a tornado. It seemed as though the whole infrastructure of the city just bubbled up to the surface in some kind of random pattern that I couldn't discern. And I began to look deeply at cities and looked at urban decay, the impulse to rebuild, and role model cities, such as Acoma, New Mexico, the oldest continually inhabited city in the Americas, and then looked at cities that simply collapsed, leaving us to ponder why. This story, Stone Soup, is a simple illustration of a question that I ask in my work often, which is why are cities resilient? And as the story goes, a clever but hungry traveler goes to a village and asks for food door to door. There isn't a morsel to be spared. The village is so poor. So he builds a fire in the middle of the village with a kettle and throws stones into it. Villagers are curious. They come and they ask him, what are you making? Stone soup. It's absolutely delicious. If I only had a little salt. And so word spread throughout the village, and soon came salt and carrots and potatoes and fish until they were all sharing a wonderful soup together. What is it that makes cities understand a good idea to build even during resource dilemma? Now, if we look at patterns of communication, we still find good ideas by a word of mouth, but it is so much broader that we can barely discover how to diagram the patterns. We understand that urban planning is not a room full of people moving blocks of humanity at will. It is instead an historic struggle and collaboration between nature and human labor. If we think of symbols, the central city or concentric city often is thought of as the center as home, and then our knowledge of the world moving outward, ever expanding. I also think of other symbols that help us navigate. Upward is progress, the beautiful meshing of gears of a clock when we're at work, and then the meandering through a caduceus to discover wellness. Our cities are so complex, our lives are so complex, we look for interconnectivity. This work is created in 3 panels. It is interchangeable, many different kinds of arrangements, and finding symbols like this help us think about flexibility within our priorities. Now, idea generation is, I think, the most important role of the arts. And this is an idea that can be researched, harnessing the Santa Ana winds, a big project, but it can be researched. These are ideas that are observable. We can beautify a neighborhood, see it happening. We can green a gray city. Other ideas are imaginary and should maybe stay on the drawing board for a little bit longer. But what is important is that we share with young builders the process of making ideas so that they can see all of the struggle along the way and not just the final results. In my travels, I've been very fortunate to work in throughout the Americas in many different craft and artisan villages. They understand their aesthetic traditions. They understand the distribution of labor that sustains their world. And they understand that the products that they make become icons for their cities. We're all migrating from city to city, and we bring our aesthetic traditions with us. As we move, it's really important for us to discover values connected to our icons, whether they're historic buildings, contemporary architecture, our natural resources. We bring these local values to the work that we do side by side in a process called I-NE, which incorporates generosity, kindness of spirit, respect through shared labor, and also humans' direct commitment to the earth that sustains them. I'm a mentor at Redline, and it has really changed my life. It's just down the street here, and I believe that mentoring is sustainable and that it is multi-generational. Redline is an urban arts laboratory with an open studio concept, and the artist residents work with the mentors, and they evaluate not only their product and their artistic growth, but their development of community service. In professional development activities in the studio, Redline artists work with teens, community members, and national and visiting artists. We are committed to making socially conscious art that educates. We do many different partnerships. This one explores traditional media and also newer technology. The steamroller printing event allowed us to do vector drawings, to then send those to the CNC router, much nicer to send it to the router than carve it by hand, and then print them on the street with the steamroller. Everyone was necessary for the involvement in this project, and we definitely raised funds for the arts. Another project is called Iron Printmaker, and in this event we invited local teams of non-artists, and they were given creativity challenges by the audience, very limited time and resources, and we gave them a full hour of training in printmaking. They then solved those problems and then evaluated the product and the process, and were able to talk about leadership and teamwork development ideas that came from the experience of art. Now, every media, and this is the important thing, every media has all of these different options for creating different opportunities. I'm a paper maker, and I believe paper making is the merger of art, culture, science, and environmental studies. I teach a class at Alverno College, which the students research the viability of local fibers for making paper, and we've had some good successes and some really interesting and pungent failures. They work with ancient methods, but they also study tree-free ideas that are sustainable, like elephant dung paper of Sri Lanka or banana paper of Costa Rica. I teach another course which is really fantastic with an analytic chemist. She's absolutely wonderful and creative. We set forward aesthetic hypotheses, and then through good science, we look at the potential and the possibility for greener, safer, cleaner use and knowledge of the arts. And we truly believe that artists can repurpose every material that they use. The students work together in studio or in laboratory, and they document their problem-solving formulas, send those formulas out into the wider community. We have many different K through 16 schools working with us on the paper-making ideas. Now, finally, art cares for people. We have a generous community of memorial builders in our city. Artists, teachers, scholars, and students of all ages build ofrendas, or offerings of respect to the deceased. And there is a grand tradition of paper making within El Dia de los Muertos. And in these altars, you see tributes of paper. It also teaches the building process, compassion, and active civic engagement with local and global events. These altars, hundreds of people contributed the stories of their lost loved ones. Far too often, we are called upon to commemorate natural disasters, outbreaks of violence, or personal grief. In building altars together, we eliminate the alienation and isolation of being in a city and replace it with the beauty and celebration of life. Art compels us to remember our past. It helps us to rebuild after adversity. And it brings us up hope in a place where all hands can build together. And this is a paper-making process of all the teen program working together to animate a handmade piece of paper in building. We assume in art that everyone that comes to the creative process will build something of incredible value. Thank you.